Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Our today's session is on development of speaking skill again. So this is part 2 of our session on development of speaking skill. Before we go on to this part, I would like to recapture what we did in the previous session on speaking skill. So here is the review of the previous lesson. We started that lesson with an introduction to speaking skill. I shared with you the importance of speaking skill. Then I moved on to some general misconceptions about speaking. I also discussed hindrances in learning good speaking skills, and I also related that to speaking in a foreign language. I related it to the Pakistani context where the learners of English use it in different contexts and find certain obstacles and hindrances. I also try to establish the interrelationship between speaking and listening. Components of speech were discussed. I shared with you how a sender sends an oral message to a receiver. The sender in this case is the speaker and the receiver is the listener. The message itself travels through some kind of medium that is used for it, and it is transmitted. Factors that affect oral delivery were also discussed in detail. We talked in detail about the pitch, speech rate, volume, vocal quality and pronunciation. I tried to establish some comparisons between English and Urdu in the Pakistani context with reference to the pitch, speech rate and especially pronunciation. Pakistani learners of English, the problems that they face in pronunciation were also highlighted. I gave some examples to make clear what kind of issues we face in pronunciation. A few solutions were also suggested how pronunciation can be improved. Well, dear students, today's lesson is on public speaking. As I have already said, the first session on speaking was about the everyday speaking activities, the different needs, requirements, contexts, hindrances, obstacles and practices related to everyday speaking. The speaking that is most of the times is interactive. Speaking that is most of the times, if not completely interactive, is partially interactive. The kind of dialogue exchanges that we have in everyday conversations were also used as a model for explaining the problems related to speaking in everyday life. In today's session, I would focus on public speaking. This type of speaking is required in particular situations. However, in the lives of students, it becomes very important because they need it for their classroom presentations, etc. Public speaking skill is the ability or art of grasping and holding on to people's attention through speech. I repeat that the ability or art of grasping and holding on to people's attention through speech is called public speaking. The key words in it are grasping and holding people's attention. Public speaking is the process of speaking to a group of people in a structured, deliberate manner. So, as compared to what we talked about in the previous session, the interaction that takes place on one-to-one basis or through dialogues, where people have to be spontaneous, they do not get much time to plan, and actually as they listen to the other person involved in interaction, meanwhile they plan for their answer. In comparison and contrast to that, you need to notice that public speaking is something that is a more planned activity, that is more structured, and it is done in a more deliberate manner. In fact, a public speaker intends to inform, influence, or entertain the listeners. So the public speaker can have different purposes. He may have to inform, to explain, to persuade, or to entertain the listeners. But the purpose is very deliberate, and this kind of speaking activity is far more focused as compared to everyday life speaking activities. Another difference that I would like to point about public speaking in relation to everyday one-to-one conversations is that in public speaking, the chances for correction, for clarification, and for repetition are far less. The reason for this is that most of the times public speaking is comparatively less interactive, which means it is partially interactive. The general conventions of public speaking are that when a person is delivering something or speaking or addressing or is making a speech, he or she is not interrupted in between and is given a chance or a scope to complete whatsoever he or she is up to. Though there are advantages of this convention, of course the disadvantage is that the possibility of getting the feedback of the listener becomes comparatively restricted. In a while, however, I would talk about feedback as well, where I would go into the details of what are the possibilities of taking feedback and how to receive and respond to that feedback of the audience during public speaking. As I have said earlier, public speaking can be for various purposes. It can be to inform, to persuade, to entertain, to motivate, or to influence. Sometimes public speaking can be more than one of these reasons, which means two or even more than two of these reasons can be a combination as a purpose for a public speaking activity. I would like you all to think here for a while, what kind of public speaking needs do you have? If you would, as learners of English or as students, if you would have to speak, what would be the main purpose of your speech? Well, I hope you would have thought about that for a while. Coming to public speaking skill for students, what I would say is public speaking for students as a skill is very, very important, because students have to learn public speaking for various classroom purposes. Number one, students have to respond and participate in classroom interaction, that is to agree, to disagree, to give opinion, to substantiate, to explain, and to compare. For all these purposes, a student has to stand up and talk to the teacher as well as to the group of students who are in the class. However, as compared to this, more formalized public speaking activities for students include classroom presentations. Well, I am sure you would agree that in a typical traditional Pakistani classroom at higher education level, students have to make presentations in the classroom. Sometimes distant learners are also asked to make online classroom presentations as well. The classroom presentations that students have to make are most of the times ranging from 5 minutes to 20 minutes time. These presentations are very formal in nature, and the student has to abide by the rules and regulations of public speaking, because the student has to address the whole class, the group of students, as well as the teacher. Public speaking skill also helps students when they have to present their projects. In that case, they have to explain, elaborate, and give examples about their projects. Finally, at the end of their degrees, when students do their research thesis, for the defense of their thesis, they again need public speaking skill, because they have to present it in front of a board or a group of teachers or the committee that is going to examine the research work, or that is going to evaluate the research work. After completing their education, can you think of some uses of public speaking skill by these students in their real lives? Yes, of course. When they go for jobs, in many jobs, in most of the jobs in today's market, actually public speaking skill is very, very important. Dear students, before I move forward, I would like to discuss a 7P approach to public speaking with you. Well, the approach is named as 7P for the simple reason that each of the points in this approach starts with a P that helps or enables the students or the learners who are trying to establish or develop their public speaking skills these points easily. The first P of this approach of public speaking is purpose. What do I mean when I say purpose of public speaking? The public speaker needs to be clear about the purpose of his public or her public speaking activity. So you need to know, why are you speaking? Number two, what do you want your audience to know, think, believe, or do as a result of your presentation? Clarity of your purpose helps you in establishing or developing your public speaking activity in an orderly manner, in a focused way, and in a way that is more efficient and effective. Second P in this approach is people. Of course, in any kind of communication, people are very important. Human aspect of communication is a very, very strong aspect of communication. If you remember, when I was talking about listening, in that session also I talked about the human perspective on listening. In the same way, there is a human perspective attached to speaking as well. Speaking actually is not only the ability to construct or produce combinations of sounds to make words, phrases, or sentences accurately. It is not only restricted to the structure and grammar of the sentences that you utter. It rather has a lot to do with the human aspects. The human aspects include, when you are making a public speaking activity, especially, you need to know who is your audience. What are their characteristics? Which means what kind of people they are, what is their gender, what do they do, where do they work, why they are listening to you, etc. You also need to know what are their skills, opinions, and behaviors. All these things are going to affect you and of course your speaking choices. So the more you are conscious about the purpose and people about whom or for whom you are going to make that public speaking activity or deliver that public speaking activity, the more you know about these, the more you are conscious about these, the more your speech would be effective and efficient. Continuing with the 7P approach to public speaking, I come to the third P, that is place. By place, what I mean is, why are you speaking to a particular group of people at a particular place? How can you plan and adapt to the logistics of this place? How can you use visual aids to help you achieve your purpose? Dear students, place is important because in different contexts and in different places, you may need to talk to the same group of people on the same issue or on the same topic in a different way. Actually, here place means context. I repeat, here place is equal to context. What do I mean by context? I mean two things by context. One is the physical context. The physical context is the physical place, where it is, what kind of place it is it an open area or a room, what is the size of the room, what are the dimensions, and what is the setting of the room, etc. Any strengths of the physical environment or any weaknesses of the physical environment or the place where you are going to speak to people is important for you to notice. However, this term place, I would not limit it to the physical context only, rather I would broaden it to the extended, to the broader context. This broader context includes the socio-cultural, linguistic and religious contexts, etc. In what kind of culture, in what kind of social settings, to what kind of group of, ethnic identity you are talking. All this also becomes a part of the broader context where you say something or where you speak to people or where you address people. The fourth P in this approach is very, very important and significant, and that is preparation. Well, as a matter of fact, all those activities of life that give us a scope or a chance for preparation, it is a very good idea to prepare ourselves for them. Though, unfortunately, a lot comes in life that does not give us a chance to prepare. As far as speaking is concerned, I would like to compare this public speaking with everyday life speaking activities as I discussed in the previous session. In everyday life speaking, we do not get much time to prepare ourselves. Sometimes we even do not know what is going to come next, what is going to follow immediately. There are unexpected twists and turns in the conversations, in the speaking activity. In contrast to that, in public speaking, we have the advantage that as speakers we can prepare ourselves. So, my dear students, as public speakers, you need to prepare yourselves pre-hand. You need to consider what pre-hand preparation do you need. Where and how can you find needed ideas, information, material, etc. for yourself. So it's tapping the resources as well. What is the type, quantity and quality of supporting materials that you need, and more importantly, where would you find them? All this is a part of preparation. The next point that I would like to share with you is planning. Planning as a part of public speaking is very important component. Planning involves the following. Is there or should there be a natural order to the ideas and information you want to present? Well, let me share with you the situation in which I am talking to you is a very different kind of public speaking activity which is completely non-interactive. I do not know you personally. I can just make a guess about the proposed or expected audience and listeners of what I am speaking about. But whatsoever I am speaking about here right now involves a lot of planning. This planning also involves my mental process of thinking what would be the order of the presentation of ideas. How would I sequence them? How would I move from one bit or one chunk of information to the other bit of information? It is also important for a public speaker that when he or she plans, he or she needs to think what are the most effective and efficient ways to organize your speech, and how would you adapt it to the purpose, people and place of your speech. So basically you also plan how would you contextualize it and how would you adapt it. Adapt means change it, to modify it to suit the needs of that particular purpose for which you are delivering something, or to that particular group of people to whom you are going to talk to, and the place, that is the context in which you are going to present that. The sixth P that I would like to share is personality. Well, as a matter of fact, we as human beings have differences. Each one of us is different from the other. In the same way, we have differences in our speaking abilities as well. Our speaking skills vary and our speaking style also varies. However, whatsoever kind of a personality you have, you need to learn as a public speaker how would you use that personality as an effective and efficient tool for public speaking. So, in this regard, you need to take care of the following. Number one, you need to think, how do you establish a link with the audience? I hope you would agree, you would have come across various situations where you would have seen people speaking to the public, and in their public speaking, the moment they would start, they would capture, they would grasp the attention of the audience. They would connect with the audience, they would establish a link with the audience. So, to come closer to the emotional aspect of the audience, to come closer to the audience on the psychological and emotional level is a part of establishing a link or a connection with them. Dear students, as a public speaker, you need to understand and you need to think, how do you associate yourself positively to your message? I hope you would agree with me that sometimes public speakers, when they speak to people, they say something, but the message that they convey does not seem to be associated with them. तो फिर उस सूरत में उनकी वो बात ही झूठी लगना शुरू हो जाती है ना. आपको यूं लगता है कि whatsoever he or she is talking about is not a truth. So use your personality, use your very self as a positive tool to create that positivity that links you with your message. As a speaker, you also need to think, what would you do to demonstrate your competence? A lot of times the speaker has a lot of potential, the speaker has a lot of competence. However, the important part is, how do you demonstrate that competence? People who listen to you need to understand, need to receive the message that you are competent, and you need to work on this part of your presentation. And finally, how would you have an impact on the audience? So to create an impact on the audience, you need to use your strengths of your personality to capture and grasp the audience and to establish a connection with them. Discussing this approach, the last point that I would like to share with you is performance. What do I mean by performance in public speaking? Well, thinking about your performance as a public speaker, you need to think what form of delivery is best suited to the purpose of your speech. Do you need to sound emotional? Do you need to sound calm and quiet? Do you need to sound very strong? Do you need to sound assertive? These are all the issues that are related to the performance. The next important point in relation to performance is, what delivery mode will suit you the best? Well, when you speak publicly, actually a wide range of or a variety of delivery modes is available. You can make choices whether you want to go for narrative style, you want to go in first person, where you want to use a passive structure, where you would give an example, where you would bring in a joke or an anecdote. These are important parts of planning your performance. You also need to think what techniques will suit your presentation the best. Maybe the techniques that would be suitable for a particular topic, for a particular purpose, people and place, they would not work in the other context with other group of people and for a different purpose. Before I move on, I would just like to ask, how about practice? Do you think practice can play a role in that? Yes, I think practice can play a very, very important role in developing public speaking skills of any speaker. Here at this point, I would also like to relate it to our context. In our context, especially in academic context, when students or learners have to present, most of the times the mode of presentation, the language of presentation is English. In that case, you see, there are a lot of hindrances and obstacles that a student has to take care of. The public speaker who in Pakistani context, especially when it comes to a student to present publicly, it becomes difficult because of certain reasons. Lack of proficiency in the use of English, problems with pronunciation, inability to control the stress-unstress patterns and intonation, problems regarding the rate of speech that might be slowed down because of problems in pronunciation, or that might be sped up because of the consciousness or because of the anxiety. All these are, and they can be, the reasons for any student who is performing some public presentation activity, public speaking activity. It can cause problems for him or her. Well, how to overcome all these problems? In order to overcome the problems and in order to prepare yourself well for public speaking, you need to design a process or a procedure for yourself. Here I'm going to share with you how can you organize public speaking. As a matter of fact, the essence of organizing an idea is actually very simple. Make a point, explain it, support it, conclude it. So you see, this is the internal order of organization within a point. Let us suppose you have 5 points that you want to establish in your one public speaking activity. For each point you need to go through the same process. Dear students, I would like to repeat that for each idea that you want to present, you need to organize it as follows: make a point, explain it, support it, and conclude it. Well, there might be slight variations according to the contents that you want to present under that point. For example, instead of explaining, you can compare, you can contrast, you can enumerate, you can show some illustration, some picture, some graph, some table, etc. But the main process would be the same. Organizing a presentation then becomes a matter of developing connections between the ideas that you have already organized. What I mean by this is that once you have prepared each idea in the way I have discussed or explained, after that you only have to organize those ideas for your presentation. However, I would like to say a word of caution here, that while developing your presentation for public speaking, all these ideas, as they are brought together, you need to develop connections. In fact, establishing connections between one idea and the other is very, very important. You need to connect and link one idea to the other in such a way that the flow in the presentation is retained. Here I sum up how to tell something. So the process how to tell is, first you tell them what you're going to tell them. Then you tell them. Then you tell them what you told them. It might sound confusing, but actually it is very clear. First you tell them what you're going to tell them, which means you introduce. Then you tell them this is the actual part of what you want to share. This is an explanation. This is where you elaborate. Then you tell them what you told them, which means you summarize, you conclude, you give it a neat ending. Dear students, do you remember I shared purposes of public speaking with you? What are the purposes of public speaking? Just to remind you: to inform, to persuade, to entertain, to motivate, and to influence. Well, there might be other purposes of public speaking. There are also possibilities that 2 or more of these purposes are combined when you are speaking to public or when you are addressing a group. Well, as far as informative and persuasive speaking is concerned, I would like to share a few ideas with you how to manage informative and persuasive speaking. We would start with informative public speaking. Purpose of informative speaking is, number one, to give some information. As the very word informative speaking tells, the purpose is to give some information. Informative speaking focuses on making an idea clear. Well, it can be about a process, a policy, a rule, or about a concept. Purpose of persuasive speaking. In comparison and contrast to informative speaking, please notice that the purpose of persuasive speaking is to convince the listeners or the audience. Persuasive speaking deals with gaining willing acceptance to your central thesis, that is your central idea. So, the purpose of a persuasive speaker is to affect the behavior or response of the listeners towards your idea in a positive way. The central idea or the thought that as a public speaker you present to a group of people, if you are a successful persuasive speaker, you would be able to gain their willing acceptance for that. For persuasive speaking, one must be more creative. You also need to be thoughtful and motivating while delivering message in a persuasive tone. You need to sound confident, and remember when I was talking about the 7P approach, I shared that sometimes there is a person who says something but the connection between the message and the sender of the message, that is the speaker, is not well established. और फिर इसीलिए I said that लोग ये कहते हैं कि झूठ बोल रहा है या ये तो लगता ही नहीं कि ये बात यूं है. So to establish the trust of people, especially in the case of persuasive speaking, it becomes very important to establish the trust of people. You need to sound truthful, you need to sound confident, and you need to sound positively related to what you persuade people for. So, dear students, you would have noticed by looking at the slide that actually I am taking informative and persuasive speaking side by side to show you the comparisons and contrasts in the needs, the purposes, the strategies, etc. So, coming to the tactics for informative speaking, I would say directness works more when you are speaking for providing some information. Sometimes in the rigmarole of what you say or what you add unnecessarily, the actual piece of information is lost. That is why when the purpose is to inform the audience, it is always good to be direct. It is also good that you immediately identify the situation. Instead of wasting a lot of time in establishing background or the context, directly hitting at the nail and identifying the situation works more in most of the cases when the purpose is to speak for providing information. However, in this regard, you need to compare the needs for positive situations versus negative situations. In positive situations where you have to inform about something good, something pleasant, something positive, something that people would appreciate, something that people would be interested in that case you can use a very direct approach and you can immediately and directly come to that. However, when you are informing in your speech about something negative, You may need to start with something that is related to it but is positive. This gradual movement from positive to the negative would make people ready to accept your idea, and they would not be shocked by what you would say. About informative speaking, I would say that since it is most of the times about policies, orders, processes and procedures, directions, etc., so it is good if you tell the operational messages such as policies, directions and procedures orderly and clearly. So two things are important here. One, to maintain the order, that is to present them in a logical sequence that would make understand and absorb the information, and secondly, to present them clearly with some clarity, so that the recipients of the message, so that the receivers of the message, those who are the listeners, they do not get confused. In this context, I would say that you can, because today is the world of, you see, modern technology, and a lot of audio-visual aids can be used for presenting what you want to present in public speaking. If the facilities are available, I would say use illustrations, figures, graphs, etc. for better understanding. Use illustrations, tables, figures, etc. to logically arrange or organize the information that you want to provide. Also, choose the right tone. When I say tone, well, it has a lot to do with the context in which you are going to speak. According to the needs of the context and the kind of people you're going to talk to and the topic that you have, you need to choose your tone. For example, if you're talking on a subject, damaged condition of fire extinguishers on your arrival, how would you comment on that? Of course, you cannot sound very enthusiastic. Okay, let me raise the questions. Should you sound apologetic? Or you should sound arrogant and rude? Or you should sound annoyed? So, the appropriate choice of tone has not only something to do with the selection or the choice of the tone, but also it has a lot to do with restricting your tone choices. That is, not overdoing whatsoever tone you opt for. What about these situations? If someone wants to hold an event on your company ground, or if someone wants an information that you cannot give, or if you cannot give your time and service, I would like you to think for a while about all these possible situations and how you would respond to these. When it comes to public speaking, my dear students, it is very important that you end on a positive note. I have given here one example. I would be grateful if you could get the new merchandise to me in time for my Friday sale. So whatsoever you have said before, you conclude with a positive note. To be grateful, to be pleased, to be happy, expressing all these ideas. With this, we move on to the tactics for persuasive speaking. As I said earlier, persuasive speaking is one of the toughest forms of public speaking, because here not only you have to pass on information or you have to tell something, rather you have to go one step ahead, that is to convince people to believe in that. Please compare it with the case of informative speaking. In informative speaking, you pass on information. You tell something, it is more knowledge oriented, knowledge based, but persuasive speaking in comparison to that is more human oriented, where you deal more with the human aspect of listening, where you try to convince the listeners. There are some There are some strategies for persuasive speaking that I would like to share. Number 1, tell in an indirect tone. Please compare this to informative speaking, where you tell in a direct tone. So for persuasive speaking, the opening sets strategy and gains attention. If at the very outset of your speaking activity you are able to grasp the attention of the listeners, that is a real success. Think about these possibilities. For example, you are talking about what, in your opinion, as a medical doctor, is the future of the private practice of medicine. Now, whatsoever your stance is on this idea or on this topic, since you have to persuade people to believe in that, you need to give an opening that is very carefully planned and that connects you with the emotional aspect of the audience. Consider this example when somebody says, while you and I dined heartily last night, 31 orphans at ED Center had only dried means to eat. Think of it as a kind of a beginning of a persuasive speech where somebody wants you to donate, to give some charity. So if the purpose of that persuasive speaking activity is to persuade people to give some charity, I think this would be a good beginning instead of a more direct beginning, a beginning that would have a more monotone and neutralized tone, stating facts, where, for example, if somebody starts with saying, dear audience, I want you to do charity because as we eat food, we need to know that 31% of the population of young population of this city cannot get food. So compare these two examples, please. For persuasive speaking, it is very important for a public speaker to search for common ground. Why there is a need to search for a common ground? Well, I would say because the common grounds help you win the emotional and the psychological support of the audience or of the listeners. How to find common grounds? Some tactics for good persuasive speaking in that regard are: insert praise for the organization that you are talking for or that you are addressing. Mention names of colleagues or friends you have worked in the past. So because persuasive speaking has a lot to do with the human aspect of speaking, it is important that you relate it to people. Relate it to people more than to things. Tone of speech is very important. It becomes even more important when it comes to public speaking. And within public speaking, when it comes to persuasive type of public speaking, it becomes immensely important. What are the areas that you need to take care of about your tone when you speak, when you address people? Motivate by tangible or intangible rewards. Be positive. Don't use negative tone. Make it stylistically and visually interesting and interactive. One strategy is refusing positively and suggesting courteously. So if you want to refute, if you want to refuse, if you want to contradict with some idea, do it with a more positive tone. In the same way, if you want to suggest some change, some modification, then suggest it courteously. So it is not what you ask for, it is how you ask for. This is a very important aspect of the strategy for persuasive public speaking, where with the help of your tone you win the people. It is also important that you avoid anger. Look at these, for example, utterances. I cannot understand your negligence. Or, your careless attitude has caused us a great loss. Or utterances like this: we will not tolerate this condition. The speaker needs to rephrase these utterances in a politer way by using a lighter tone. The speaker also needs to be less direct in this case. It is always good in public speaking that you close with goodwill. I think it would be a good idea avoiding ending with old negative apologies. Again, may I say that I regret that we must refuse, or I sincerely hope that you understand why we must make this decision. So these kind of repetitive, old, worn out and negative apologies are not very good strategies for public speaking. Always try to end with a pleasant off-subject comment, so that people feel psychologically and emotionally more touched. Offer assurance that appreciate the reader as a customer or inquirer. Invite future patronage, cooperation, suggestions or compliance with the decision. So ending on a positive note and ending on a note where you express your desire to continue the connection between you and the audience is very important. For example, ending a speech by saying, "Let us know if you have any further problems." Or if as a student, for example, you are giving a presentation in the class, ending it up by saying, if anybody has questions, please come up with your queries. I would love to answer. Or you may say, after the formal presentation, I'm sure some of you would come to me to share their further ideas on this. So these kinds of closings always enable the listeners to stay connected with the speaker. My dear students, in fact, informative and persuasive speaking that I have been talking about can be used in different contexts by you. You can use it for certain purposes in your academic and non-academic life. For example, informative and persuasive speaking strategies are to be used for presenting reports, for expressing goodwill, for giving briefings, or for giving introductions, or for instructions, to announce policies, procedures, to share facts, values, to make claims, requests and inquiries. Of all the public speaking activities, the most important part is audience analysis. Knowledge about the topic, level of comprehending, attitude, interest and background. You need to know about all this in relation to your audience. What I mean by this is, you need to know what kind of people you're going to talk to. You need to try to make some kind of judgment and evaluation pre-hand before you meet your audience. You need to know what is their knowledge about the topic you're going to talk about. If your audience already has a lot of knowledge on the topic and you start with the basics, then of course the audience would be disinterested in what you say. If your audience has very little knowledge about what you are going to talk about and you start from a point of difficulty that is very high for them to understand, it would be impossible, I would say at least nearly impossible, for the audience to be interested in that. You also need to analyze the audience pre-hand for their level of comprehension. What kind of language, what kind of level of difficulty of language they would be able to understand, what is their general comprehension level. You need to make some kind of exact judgments, at least wise guesses about that. Attitude, interest and background of the audience is very important for the speaker. So knowing about the attitude, interest and background of the audience is a very, very important part of audience analysis. You also need to know what kind of audience you have and what can be the possible degree of agreeing or disagreeing to a point. Well, there are certain signs that tell you as you address the audience. While addressing them, you can also analyze what kind of connection is being established or is not being established between you and them. That is the sender and the receivers of the message. Dear students, I repeat my point that the speaker needs to understand the audience, that what are the possibilities of him or her to disagree to a point and to what an extent he or she can show his or her agreement or disagreement to a point. Simply stating, it is about analyzing the tolerance level of audience. With this, I move on to the next point, that is selecting supports for your speech. Through your pre-analysis of your audience, you can select any or all of these supports for your speech, that is examples, illustrations. Why illustrations or pictures? Because one picture or one illustration says maybe more than 1,000 words. Statistics. Well, statistics or facts and figures, they always add authenticity to what you say. Quotations. Quotations always help because they add to the authenticity of your work. They also provide supporting argument given by other people. Comparisons. Comparison always help in understanding of the audience what you say in relation to other things. Definitions. Especially at the outset of a new concept that you are presenting or a term that you are using, it is always good to define, because this definition enables the audience to understand what you say further. Here are some strategies for an effective non-verbal delivery. This includes your posture, movement, gestures, facial expressions, and appearance. Well, actually all these points I would talk in detail later on in a session that I would do on your presentation skills, and these would be addressed there in detail. Here at the moment, what I would just like to say is that as a public speaker, your posture, that is the way you stand, your movements, your expressions, your gestures, your how do you lean forward, do you stand straight, do you have folded arms, etc., and your appearance, all these things matter a lot because they affect what you are communicating verbally. Dear students, as a public speaker, you need to maintain the attention of your listeners. So when you start your public speaking, you have to gain the attention of your speakers, and then through the whole speaking activity you have to maintain their attention. Maintaining the attention of audience, especially when it comes to activities of public speaking that are longer, that go for a longer stretch of time, is not a very easy task. In this case, you have to make some choices. The choices need to be very clever. The first one is mind over matter. So be mentally alert. It is not how much, especially in the case of informative public speaking, it is not how much you convey in one go, it is how you organize that. Tell the story, because people can relate themselves to stories, they can identify themselves with your narratives, and narratives and stories generate interest. Use jokes or anecdotes if possible. Use imagery and metaphors because they add to clarity. Employ quotations, facts, and statistics. In order to maintain the attention of the audience, keep on varying your vocal pace. What I'm talking about is the rate of your speech. Keep on changing it. Sometimes go speedy, sometimes become comparatively slower. Keep on varying your tone and volume as well. Monotone would not work for a long stretch. In the same way, speaking at the same volume is not a good idea for public speaking. According to the idea that you are presenting, according to the point you are explaining or elaborating, you need to raise or reduce your volume. Punctuate words with attention. Please notice the way I am going to read the next sentence for you. Analyze audience, connect and interact with them. So you see the comma after audience that you can see on your screen, I have verbally created a pause. I have punctuated it with my voice. Complement words with visual aids. As I've already said, use different visual aids such as graphs, illustrations, etc. to complement what you say. Do you remember I showed you a pie chart at the beginning of today's session? Convey controlled enthusiasm. To be a public speaker and to be a good public speaker needs some kind of enthusiasm. However, the word of caution is that it should be controlled enthusiasm. The listeners or the audience should be conveyed that you are a balanced personality. And finally, get them in fun. Incorporate humor. Bring things in your presentation that are said on a lighter note because they release tension and makes the audience involved. Well, my dear students, I understand that many of us have the fear of public speaking, especially when it comes to students in higher education where they have to present before people in English because of the pressures caused by the lack of proficiency in English, because of the pronunciation problems and because of lack of fluency. The students or the learners find it very difficult to make any kind of presentations. The question is how to overcome the fear of public speaking and how to deal with stage fright. I would simply say failing to prepare is preparing for failure. What I mean by that is prepare yourself for the presentation. Preparation is the key to your success. The benefits or the advantages of the kind of public speaking that the students have to do in form of presentations or thesis defense or project proposals is that they have the time to prepare and plan for it. It's a fully planned activity, so ensure that you do not fail to prepare, because if you do, actually you are preparing for failure. Mind over matter, rehearse your talk. So you see, give your time to what you are going to present. Think about it. Pre-check any equipment you will need. Take an object with you that you need. Breathe deeply and slowly before speaking, so relax yourself. Move during the speech. Well, as a matter of fact, right now when I am presenting here in front of a camera, I am very conscious of it because I have been given the instructions not to move much. But in real life situation, when you present and you talk to people, a lot of movement of your body, of your hands, through your gestures, through your facial expressions, you convey a lot. So these movements not only enable you to convey a lot to the audience, but also they help you overcome the fear of stage or of public speaking. Well, in my case, it is very difficult to know how am I doing. I cannot use audience feedback right now. I do not know how are you responding to what I say. But in most of the cases of public presentation where you address or talk to people or a group of students, etc., it is very easy to judge how are you doing. For that, you can use audience feedback. During your public speaking presentations, etc., reach as many of the audience as possible. Notice their body language. Respond to audience questions, because this one-to-one answering to questions helps establishing the link between the speaker and the listeners. Handle unexpected issues smoothly. For example, if the microphone is not working, for example, if the multimedia is not responding, for example, if suddenly the light is gone, or anything, as a matter of fact, if it takes place, handle the issues smoothly. Take them lightly. The more lightly you would take them, the less they would affect the audience. Dear students, here are some other ways of receiving the feedback from the audience and using it for your effective and efficient public speaking. As a public speaker, you need to notice the signs that audience is not listening. How would you come to know that the audience is not listening? Well, when you find that the audience or individuals in the audience start scanning across the room, which is they start looking around, it means they are not listening. If you notice more than a few people whispering to the people sitting by their sides, this is again a sign that whatsoever you are speaking about, people are not interested in. Other signs are that they start tapping their feet or they start looking down. Sometimes they rub their face, their hand or hair. All these show their distraction, all these show that they are not receiving what you are sending to them as a message. If their eyes glaze over and look at the screen again and again, it shows again they are searching to hold on to the loop, trying to catch up with what you were saying. If they fidget, they yawn, they flip through their notes, or they make copious notes, or if they sigh heavily, all these signs are indicators for a public speaker that the audience is not listening. Sometimes even you would notice that there would be people who would lie back in the chair and cross their arms. These are also the signs of the audience being disinterested in whatsoever you are saying. So concluding about how you need to create your style as a public speaker, I would say craft an introduction. When I use the word craft, actually I do not merely mean designing it logically, rather I mean designing it in a creative way, crafting it in an innovative way that would immediately capture the attention of the listeners. Go with soft skills. Do not forget to extend courtesy. Thank the audience for the opportunity to be given to you to speak. Tactfully handling the interruptions, etc., or all the interruptions that come in. This is a part of extending courtesy. Finally, show an awareness of others and establish that as a speaker you are a caring person. What I mean by that is deal with people in soft ways. Well, here are some important points, some important don'ts. As a presenter, don't hide behind the podium. The second tip is don't abuse the word and. When I say don't abuse the word and, what I mean by that is do not keep on dragging from one sentence or one idea to the other by connecting them with and. I want to say this and I want to present that idea and. So this repetitive use of and should be avoided. Well, as a public speaker, it is very important that you do not overlook time constraint. The time that is allocated to you, you need to plan your speaking activity according to the given time. Don't distract from the topic. While speaking on a platform where you are addressing people, there is a lot of scope for distraction from the topic because you are not in one-to-one interaction with people and you are not getting direct interactive feedback from the listeners. In this case, it is very important then that you stick to the topic. You do not have any diversions as such. Do not confuse enthusiasm with loudness. Sometimes public speakers, in order to show that they are very enthusiastic about whatsoever they are talking about, they use a loud voice. Remember, enthusiasm is not an equivalent to loudness. Do not talk down to the other person, which means do not insult. Do not show that you want to insult the other person. Do not give any signs that you think you are superior to your audience. And finally, don't take negative responses very personally. What does it mean? It means if something goes wrong, if something goes unexpected, if a response comes that is negative, try to take it lightly and don't take it as something very personal. So, my dear students, what conclusions we can draw from today's session is that public speaking is an art. It involves a lot of understanding on the part of the speaker about the audience, about the purpose of speaking, about the place or the context in which something is to be said. It also needs a lot of preparation on the part of the public speaker. Keeping all the points that we have discussed in today's session, if you prepare your presentations well, I'm sure with some practice you can improve your public speaking skills. Thank you very much.